welcome to the DigitalCxO podcast. I'm Amanda Rosani, and with me today is Mike Vizard. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy to chat as always.
Same. Well, let's dive right in. On our DigitalCxO.com website, we have an article by Nathan Eddy. This is about an Infosys survey, and there's some interesting information coming from that. Less than half of contracted cloud services are being consumed, with the majority of CPG and retail respondents struggling to monitor cloud costs. So what are you hearing from business leaders out there as it regards to cloud cost?
Cloud computing is still too damn hard. That's the problem. And fundamentally, it requires developers with infrastructure expertise, and a lot of them don't want to have that, and they find the infrastructure gets in the way. Or I need to go find a DevOps team and a bunch of software engineers who can manage that cloud environment on behalf of those developers. And I'm hoping this is going to get better sooner with the help of AI. But right now, I mean, we all talk about like, oh, we're just going to move everything over to the cloud willy-nilly. And A, it's hard to move stuff into the cloud. And B, it's hard to manage it when you get there. And C, it gets expensive in a hurry. A lot of folks I talk to are also repatriating some of their workloads in the cloud, not because they don't like the cloud per se, but they did the math and they found out that sometimes the on-premises environments are cheaper to run over the long haul. Back in the COVID days, there was no other decision to be made. So a lot of workloads wound up on the cloud when maybe they shouldn't have been there in the first place. So the world's becoming more federated. This is all relevant to digital CXOs, though, in this regard, right? Most, if not all, of these digital initiatives depend on some sort of cloud computing capability. And if it's too expensive and we don't have the people to manage it and we don't have the skills to invoke it, it limits the pace of the digital transformations. And this is becoming a fundamental problem. I mean, at its core, it's really an IT problem, but the impact on this is all on the pace of digital transformation, which is probably not going as quickly as everybody would like.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, all I heard back in the day when everybody was migrating to cloud was how much more affordable it would be. But I think they're now sitting back and realizing there are certain things that would best benefit from not migrating to the cloud, whereas others would. So it depends on the reason behind it. And some things would be more practical to stay put.
Yeah, your mileage will vary by workload considerably. So you need to really think through exactly what's happening with the workload, what the requirements are. There's a tendency to kind of just say, if you're a digital CXO, we're going to default to the cloud. Truth of the matter is more data is being consumed at the point where it's being created, and that's pushing more compute out to the edge. And a lot of the digital applications that you're trying to drive need to be running near real time and soon have AI models embedded in them, and all that stuff is going to happen out at the edge. And there is this thing, it's called network latency and the laws of physics. It has not been suspended, and it still impacts the decisions as to what workloads to run where. And I don't think digital CXOs need to be an expert in all that stuff, but I firmly believe they need to have a good appreciation for what's going on here.
Yeah, and a good team behind them that they can collaborate with and can kind of keep them up to date on everything.
Yeah, unless they just want to pay the bill for everything no matter what, which I think is probably the shortest path to unemployment.
So moving on, you had an interesting interview with Ryan Matzner. He's the head of Fueled, about AR and VR goggles and how those are going to be integrated into workplace. So can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, his point was just that, like all new technologies, early on it seems like it's expensive and who's going to use this, but the price points for these things will come down. And if you're really thinking about this in a 1 year to 2 year timeline horizon, if you want to go build some sort of augmented reality type of application, you need to start working on that now, because with the assumption that the cost of the infrastructure is going to drop to a point where it's more affordable. But if you're going to wait for the price point of the goggles to reach something before you start go build these things, you're going to be late, because everybody else is already starting to experiment with this stuff today. I'm not saying that, you should put this at the front of the we're going in production tomorrow list, but it's pretty clear that these goggles are going to have a bigger role. I mean, he's talking about two things. One is gaming. That's kind of obvious, but I know, am I going to use these goggles to manage, business processes? Probably not. But are there tons of digital simulations and all kinds of interesting things that can be done on the engineering side and field support and all kinds of things that, today we are still trying to do with a heavy manual lift that these things will help automate? I think the time is now. And so his point is, hey, you expect to be in this game in a year or two, maybe you start playing with this stuff tomorrow.
Yeah, and I mean, there are so many use cases, for example, in the training realm. So I know I went to a university here a while back and got to experience healthcare training via VR goggles. So there's a lot of use cases coming down the road.
Right. So I was curious, but how did they simulate the grumpy patient who doesn't want to be touched?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Like you felt you were in the hospital room and there's the patient in the bed and all the equipment, and it was interesting. So
sounds pretty cool to me.
Yeah. So moving on, you had another interview with Ugo Orsi of Digitate, and this one's talking about how middle managers really need to change the way they're managing in this day and age of AI. So can you explain more?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of A, common sense, and B, there's not enough common sense out there. So it seems to me when I go talk to folks out there, there's a bunch of end users who are randomly using AI to test stuff and play with stuff and create stuff that's interesting. And then there's a bunch of C-level execs who are, basically telling boards and shareholders that AI will transform the world tomorrow. Somewhere in between that is the rank and file middle managers, otherwise known as the people who actually get stuff done. And they're the ones that kind of have to step back and say, well, how are we going to reinvent these processes and where will AI fit in? Where are all these so-called digital assistants that are going to become everybody's coworkers going to fit in alongside their humans? What exactly are the humans going to wind up doing in a workflow that adds value? This battle is going to be won and lost at the middle management layer. It's not going to be won at the board level, and it's not just going to be won by a bunch of random employees, playing with stuff, right? And it needs a plan, it needs an execution strategy, and ultimately that lives and dies with the middle managers. I think everybody who's a digital transformation officer at this point has already figured that out. They've experienced it firsthand. They probably had some project go awry simply because the folks tasked with executing it were like, this thing is poorly constructed and doesn't really match up with anything that we are doing today. I think the same thing may be happening with AI. If we don't get those middle managers involved today, it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Absolutely. And I mean, AI is really affecting all processes and all departments and probably all levels of management, honestly, as it rapidly advances and goes into every industry.
Hey, but if you are a middle manager and you aspire to be something more, AI might be the best thing that ever happened to you.
So next up, we have an article by Adrian Bridgewater. This is on DigitalCxO as well. And it's about data GPT, democratizing the use of data analytics across the enterprise. So What are you hearing about that?
This is an example of a use case that's pretty compelling. Part of the problem with all the analytics stuff that we've invested in over the years is that it takes a small army of people to set it up, and then the people who consume it have to have a really good understanding of what that's in that dashboard and what it's telling them. And it's kind of, for lack of a better phrase, it's still a glorified canned report. ChatGPT and these other tools allow you to interrogate the data without having to be a, master SQL jockey or whatever it is. You can just start asking questions, and we're looking at the democratization of analytics. And we should be able to make better, more informed, data-driven decisions as a result, assuming, of course, that the thing that was used to train the LLM is reliable data in the first place, which is sometimes a big assumption. But I think we're on the cusp of this. And so Adrian's article is one more example of, of a company and a product and moving us in that general direction. There's going to be a lot more of this stuff. I mean, you can just look around. It's pretty much, it's already here. It's just not evenly distributed just yet. And it's maybe not perfectly optimized. But I think I'm looking forward to an age where, instead of bolting on analytics or running it in after the process, it's in the process and it's part of our everyday work life just because we can type literally natural language that says, hey, what's up with this process here and what percentage of this is going to happen by Friday?
Yeah, I mean, I imagine that would make things so much easier. But like you said, it's going to be about accuracy. I know some people have been using it to, say, write some code for them, but the code doesn't always work properly. So, it's helpful as a tool, and I'm sure it'll get better and better. But it sure would be nice just to ask and have that information right away.
And here's the thing that will happen. The machines are going to teach us how to ask questions in much the same way that search taught us how to query data and look for things. As I play with all this stuff, it's going to become apparent that the difference between one user and the other user is their ability to navigate the logical flow of asking questions and getting the prompts together in a way that is compelling and interesting. Too often, we sit like we're watching television when we look at analytics and we're just waiting for, the thing to unspool in front of us, but we're not directly engaged with that data, and we question the data all the time, but we have no way of playing with it to really get at the veracity of it. So I think we're gonna be moving to a time soon where they say that the sign of real intelligence is not knowing everything, it's your ability to ask good questions. I'm hoping we're gonna have a little leap in humankind here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more that people play around with these GPTs, the more they'll refine those prompts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm hoping that we don't get too dependent on prompt libraries, right? I mean, there's a bunch of things you can do to automate a set of workflows and whatever, but there is no substitute for playing with this yourself.
Yes, exactly. So now we're going to move on to an article from Ed Waddle, I believe is how we say his last name. And this is on TechStrong AI. And it's about AI for social good and how there's so many great aspects of AI in healthcare for sustainability purposes. And so, yes, there are pitfalls in bias and data privacy, but there's a balance there that outweighs as far as social good. So what are you hearing?
I mean, AI is a tool. It happens to be one of those tools that cuts both ways. There are issues. There are threats to jobs and industries, and everybody's cheese is moving. But there's a whole raft of things that are going to happen or that can happen now that will make our lives better. And we should not let our fear of one preclude us from looking at the positive sides of the other. And more and more we should play. To my earlier point, a lot of things that we previously would not have considered doing for the good of the order, as they say, we can now do because the lift isn't going to be that heavy, or it's more attainable. And maybe we should just take a step back for a minute and say, hey, is there a list of things that we could do for our fellow humans that, with a little help from AI, that would be good for everybody? And, I like this article just because it kind of gives us a list and starts thinking people in that direction.
Yeah, I was watching a show the other day about these people that got stuck deep down in a cave. And, when they try to send rescue, they're putting their lives at risk. It's very difficult. So I foresee things like rescue missions with AI and attached to drones, collecting data and being able to just go into those dangerous situations. So I've seen a lot about AI and drones technology doing a lot of things.
Yeah, I see the same thing. I mean, if you're in the fire department or the police department, we're asking you to assume a level of risk that, your loved ones would probably prefer you didn't. So if there's another way to do something that involves using AI and robotics, by all means, I don't think we need to keep putting people in harm's way, especially to rescue somebody who may have done something silly in the first place.
I agree. Well, that brings us to the end of today's show. Mike, do you have any last thoughts to leave our audience with?
Just, don't be afraid. AI, it's scary, and there are things going on all over the place that, can be problematic. Just remember, it's a tool. It's probabilistic, so don't have too much faith in it, right? It's a machine that's guessing based on a bunch of data that it has about what the next probable thing is. As such, it is an enthusiastic helper, shall we say. Sometimes overly enthusiastic. So, you need to keep an eye on it. You need to teach it and train it. And if it's easier for you to give it a name, by all means, go ahead. But frankly, it's here. The question is what to do with it.
That's exactly right. And I want to thank our audience for staying tuned to our show every week. And please share in the comments what's the most interesting to you. And until next week, have a great day.
See you later, folks.